So good afternoon and welcome to the spring meeting of the Franchise Business Network, hosted in association with the International Franchise Association. My name is Josh Piper, and I, along with my colleague Gary Duvall and our firm Dorsey, Whitney, are your hosts for today. A little bit about me and Gary. We're both dedicated full-time franchise business lawyers, have many, many years of experience in the industry and with the IFA, and we're very pleased to be able to host these meetings and have you all here today. For those of you that are new to FBN meetings, they generally happen once per quarter, and they're really a great opportunity for those of us in the region who work in the franchise industry to come together, meet each other, meet new people, exchange ideas and best practices. Hopefully those of you that are here in person today have had some opportunity to make those connections. I also want to welcome those of us that are joining us online. We have people from as far away as India listening in online. So welcome to them. And as I mentioned, these are hosted in association with the IFA. So if you are not an IFA member and are interested in learning more about it and what membership offers, I'd encourage you to come see me after the presentation. So today's topic is one that is always popular, especially with franchisors. And the topic is today's most effective methods for lead generation. And we have a fantastic panel here for you today of speakers that have decades of experience with lead generation and marketing, and they'll be offering their observations on the business aspects of lead generation. At this point, I'd like the gentlemen to introduce themselves to you. So you want to start with Brad?
Me?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brad Stevens. I am 18 months into my franchise journey as a franchisee and as an area developer for an East Coast brand called CPR Cell Phone Repair. We have 3 stores in the state of Washington right now. We'll have 5 within the next 60 days. And so I kind of approached this topic from 2 angles, both as somebody who was a lead at one time, as well as somebody who's trying to generate leads so that we can build a brand in the area. So I think probably a lot of you are in that same position. So that'll be the perspective that I come from. As far as just marketing background, I ran U.S. marketing for Starbucks for 5 years. I worked for Nordstrom. I ran a small specialty pet food retailer called Mudbay. So I have a retail background, and hence my interest in franchising comes from a retail angle. So I'll give you a little bit of background on me.
Great. My name is Thomas Scott, and I run a franchise lead generation company. So that's all we do is help brands generate leads, grow, get better development efforts. And we worked with everybody from really large, mature brands like Sonic down to people recruiting their first franchisee. And have been a franchisee and a franchisor, and have worked with 50 or 60 different brands and know a lot of people in the room. But I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee, is where our firm's based, and it's a fun trip to Seattle for me.
Thank you. I'm Jeff Levy. I have been a franchisee, sort of coach, broker for the Entrepreneur Source since 2002. So leads are sort of the lifeblood of my business, obviously. So I've got some thoughts to share, and hopefully I'll learn a little bit myself today. My background is I've been living in the Northwest since 1984. If you see that building out to the left, the company that I used to be the president of actually designed the maintenance system for that building. Now, if you wonder what that has to do with franchising, absolutely nothing. That's why I got out of that and into franchising, because this is much more fun. I think I'm up to about 225 or 230 people that actually helped sign franchise agreements locally.
Including Brad.
I'm one.
And Jeff.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. So before we get to the main part of the presentation, since you came all the way to a law firm for this event, we didn't want you to leave without some bit of legal education relevant to the topic. So I'd like to spend really just a few minutes on some selected legal issues that can arise with respect to lead generation. After that, we'll turn it over to Thomas, who will give us some overview of some trends in lead generation, and then segue into our panel discussion. We'll, of course, aim to leave time at the end for questions, but if you have one in the middle of the presentation, feel free to raise your hand. For those that are online on the webinar, unfortunately, for this one, we won't be able to take live questions, but all of our email contact information is part of the materials that were given to you, so feel free to follow up by email. So lead generation is part of the franchise sales process, and often at the earliest stages of that, and often involves advertising of various kinds. So I just wanted to cover really at a high level some of the select legal issues that franchisors run into with respect to advertising. And really these are intended just to be reminders of issues that you maybe should be already familiar with, or if not, triggers for you to go discuss those further with your legal counsel. So the first topic is advertising in registration states. So generally, all of your promotional materials, whether it's brochures, videos, or audio, any advertisements, your websites, must be filed in certain states that regulate franchising and must contain certain legends and disclaimers unless there's an exemption that applies. So the states that currently require you to do filings of your advertising: California, Maryland, Minnesota, New York, North Dakota, Rhode Island, and our very own Washington state. So the main point to be aware of, though, is that all of these materials must be submitted and filed with the state 3 to 10 days before you can use them, depending on what state you're talking about. Those materials become automatically effective if the state doesn't object, and it's important to know that this is a separate filing requirement from those of surrounding your FDD, whether it's a renewal or amendment or filings related to brokers. All the registration states consider it a violation of their laws to make an offer without registering and delivering a disclosure document, so it's a good idea, especially in those states where you're not registered, to have a legal disclaimer at the bottom of your materials, printed materials, again, websites, all of those that disclaim that an offer is being made. I'm sure we've all, if we've browsed franchisor websites, have seen these disclaimers. But it's important to work with your legal counsel to tailor those to your specific situation, the states that you are in, you're not in, etc. And also, because many other countries have franchise disclosure and registration laws, it's important to disclaim those too, if that's applicable. The next is advertising on the internet, which is really an offshoot of the first topic. I'm certain we're going to talk about the internet and lead generation a little bit today, but generally the same rules that would apply to print advertising is going to apply to your internet advertising, but about half of those registration states do exempt your websites, as long as you have the kind of disclaimer we talked about on there, and as long as you're not making direct communications to specific individuals in those states, not making offers or sales to them. And so an example of a direct communication would be like targeted emails to individuals that you think might be prospects. So basically, similar to we talked about before, it's important to have notices and disclaimers at the bottom of your websites, on your social media posts, disclaiming that it's not an offering and that an offering can only be made through an FDD. California has a very specific website exemption statute that requires you to do an annual notice filing. That's something that we typically recommend franchisors do. And so for the registration states that don't exempt websites, you'll need to file printouts of your web pages, social media posts, and that kind of thing. And then finally, the content of your advertising is heavily regulated by franchise registration states, the FTC, and just general advertising law. The things to be cognizant of are your marketing materials must be consistent with your current FDD and all your agreements and manuals and practices and system standards. And as those things change, your marketing materials need to change, and if there's a filing requirement, you need to do that as well. And then, very importantly, if your marketing materials refer to actual or possible franchisee or company unit financial performance, FPRs, financial performance representations, those must contain some very specific disclaimers and information, and they must be described in more detail in Item 19 of your FDD. So if you don't have FPRs in your Item 19, you can't have anything like that on your advertisements. So that just basically scratches the surface of these topics. But hopefully you've been reminded of some of the obligations that franchisors face with advertising directed at prospective franchisees. Now I'd like to invite Thomas up, who's going to go through some slides on lead generation.
Great. So how many of you are able to generate enough franchise leads for quality buyers? Like, if you raise your hand if you're real happy with volume and quality. Yeah. How many aren't, just in general? Is that something you struggle with in general? Is that that's like an evergreen topic in the franchise industry, is when we don't hit sales results, It's always because we don't have enough franchise leads. And the actual truth is it's usually another reason that we're not attracting the right people or we're not reaching the people who are the best fit for the franchise. But just a little bit about my background. So I started out as a journalist. I worked for the New Orleans Times-Picayune for 15 years. And then in one of those weird kind of right-angle career turns, ended up as a multi-unit franchisee in a real estate home staging franchise, and then bought the franchise company. So I've been a franchisee, I've been a franchisor for a lengthy amount of time, and have a journalism background. And those three pieces kind of made me a business storyteller, was a good way to explain it. And what I realized from my own entrepreneurship is that there's an alarming gap in the way companies tell their own stories, and it's very difficult for people who are interested to relate meaningfully to a company and understand the opportunity. And that's really at the root of all the problems we have with lead generation as an industry. So let's start with some stats, because I want to kind of illustrate how big the issue is. So, and this is from Daryl Johnson's State of the Union address at the IFA from FranData. You might have seen these. 795,933 individual franchise locations. That's the size of our industry today. They produce over $944 billion in sales, 3% of the GNP. And last year, I don't know if you caught this, if you went to the IFA, there was more than one new franchisor started a day in 2015. So there were more than. It was an historic level, and that's continuing this year. That's a wonderful thing, I think, in the scheme of things. But what that really does is means for every potential buyer, there's more choices than ever before. And you really have to be much more competitive and connecting with the person that's a good fit for you. And I think that's a trend we're going to see continue. But if you look at the number of people on Google who are searching for business or franchise ownership information, our estimation from our research is that's about 12 million, a population of 12 million people. So at any given time in the U.S. alone, there are 12 million potential buyers of businesses out there. 12 million. That's much larger than the state of Alabama or Louisiana or one of those. We opened only 14,000 new locations last year, I think was the stat that I got from FranData. It was a relatively low number. In high years, we get in the low 20s. But, at that rate, that's a conversion. It's an awful conversion rate. It means we convert a very, very small fraction of a percent of the potential people into actual owners. And I see that as a disconnect in the way the franchise industry markets itself. And I think there are some barriers to discovery that any brand in franchising can overcome with better thinking about how people buy franchises, who they are, how to connect with them, and aligning yourself more with the way people want to research and buy a franchise today. So the average franchisor, if you're new to franchising or you're an existing the average franchisor, this is from Franchise Update's annual lead generation report, said that we're going to recruit 24 new buyers this year. Like that was what the average person shot for out of the several hundred brands in that study. Out of those, when you looked at how much they actually spent and what the cost per close was, it was $9,800 of advertising dollars was what it took to recruit every individual buyer, like just on average. There are some brands that are much lower than that. Some, if you're a high investment food business, you might have a much higher number depending on who you're targeting. But in general, like the average system in franchise, like an up and going mature system that's actually recruiting, spent well over $200,000. And a lot of our clients have budgets that are way higher than that. If you're going to do 100 deals, it's very common for somebody to have a $500,000 just advertising budget for development. So it does cost money to generate leads, but it doesn't mean you need to throw money away or be foolish with the money. And one of the things that I think we need to understand is there's been a general increase in the volume of search traffic for franchise information. The blue line is search traffic for business ownership and business opportunities, non-franchise part of the segment. If you look at that line, it's decreasing. If you look at the line through the recession for franchise information, it stayed pretty true, and it's beginning to trend up a little bit. Why that's an important slide is that indicates that franchising is more legitimate with a larger group of people than it ever has been before. And we have some really interesting changing demographics in the franchise industry that are going to change the face of franchising as we go. But franchising is a kind of a highest trust point that I've seen it in the 20 years I've been involved in franchising. It's it's an awesome time to be in this industry, and it's stunning to me that we miss the opportunities that are so easy to get if you just align yourself correctly with the way people want to buy. So that's, if you're a broker, if you guys are several brokers, and I mean, that's an important thing. It just means that there are more people open to franchise ownership than ever before, and some of the obstacles that have been there in the past aren't there today, like health insurance and some of the lack of financing have come back. When we looked at where deals came from in the franchise industry, just an overview, not everybody works with franchise brokers, but out of the 14,000, 65% of them were new owners, people like new to the business, like they were their first business or they were coming into a system from outside the system. 20% were internal expansions where an existing owner says, well, I really love this business. They bought another unit or third unit or fifth unit. And 15% came from what we would call the kind of cluster of broker related. It could be a traditional franchise broker or a business broker or a resale to a broker. But that's the mix. So, if you're projecting growth and you have a business that aligns itself with brokers, that's really what you should think about. If you're brand new, you might have everybody out of the new one, but if you're a mature system, resales are really important to think about, and broker networks, that's generally what the average system is seeing today. And I want to talk a little bit about who our buyers are before we get into our panel discussion, because I think it's going to be a good conversation. There really are three clearly distinct buying groups today. This is really the first, probably this year was the year where we really kind of went from 2 to 3. Before the last year or so, we really had Generation X people, which would be I'm in my mid-40s. That would be in my group. We get no respect whatsoever. The boomers who have historically been, for lack of a word, just the white guy in a suit. That's who we've recruited as an industry over time. There was a really fascinating stat at the IFA this year on diversity and the population of people who are open to franchise ownership. And that population right now is now 39% non-white, is what they would kind of classify it as. I mean, people from ethnic and racial backgrounds other than Caucasian American. And we're seeing that in a lot of lead generation we do for clients, that just the diversity of people buying and investing in franchises is much different than it was even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So I'd really be open to that. But baby boomers, as a group of people, and this is a really interesting stat, less than 10% of baby boomers associate with entrepreneurship, meaning they would knowingly say, I would really like to own a business. Less than 10%, like 8%, 9%, is about what the range is. If you think about that, baby boomers as a group, a generation, were taught, you go to college, you go to work for a Fortune 500 company, retire at 60 with a pension. That's the safe, tried and true career path. Like I see you shaking your head, that's exactly what most people think. The Generation X people are kind of slackers and get started and want to do their own thing. But the real surprising part of franchising today is the rise of the millennial buyer. And if you ask that same group the same question, like, would you be open to owning a business, and do you think that's something you'd like to do with your life? It's 60% of people would prefer to own a business. Their idea of going to college and accruing a bunch of debt, working for somebody else, and retiring early seems really foolish and sketchy and not at all like something you should do with your life. Like, they actually see that as a risky, sellout thing to do. And so as a group, it's a group of people, and the oldest millennials are now 32, and they're really starting to enter. I'm seeing my lead flow this year from last year and the year before for all the brands we work with is dramatically different. And there just are people, they're beginning to get money. In the early 30s, they start to settle down, they get married, have kids. It's really changing the way we have to communicate with brands, and we're going to talk about that as one of the questions. But that's just to set the stage for the panel discussion. But I think that's some good. The big takeaway is there are 3 different groups now, and you have to think differently about them. We're going to talk about that. And that the population of people that are interested in ownership is much, much, much bigger than where we've been historically able to capitalize on. And I think that's an awesome problem to have, because one of the really wonderful things about working in franchising is you really get to help people participate in the economy at their full face value, not as an employee of somebody else. And that reduces income inequality. It makes the world a better place. It gives people power over their settings, and the day of business ownership as the norm has really kind of arrived. And so that's it's why we have so many franchise companies starting up and why so many existing ones are doing well today, even though the economy's still kind of trucking back. And so if we're going to switch to panels here.
Thanks, Thomas.
Nice job, Thomas.
So now we're going to walk through some key questions and let our panelists offer their insights on them. But again, this is supposed to be a collaborative discussion, so please don't make all this hard work Jeff did moving these tables so that everyone could see. So the first question, how is the nature of lead generation changing? Anybody want to take a first crack?
I've been in this part of the business, again, from the broker-coach perspective, so I can't really talk from the franchisor's perspective, but I've been doing it for 14 years, and I think there's certain things that have clearly changed from a lead perspective, but I also think there's things that have not changed. And so, one of the things that has not changed is that most leads that I see that get generated through the internet are very difficult to reach for some reason. You call people up and who are you and why are you calling, and I never ask for information. So there's just an odd disconnect that needs to be resolved in some way. So again, because my purview is of the broker side, what I've seen is that the better, more successful brokers, and I was really surprised to see such a small percentage of deals being done through that channel, have gone to other creative ways of developing leads. So some people do resume mining. And I don't do it, so I can't describe it, but I think they have ways of going into things like Monster.com and Career Builder, etc., and getting resumes and looking at the resume, and usually a resume is someone who's out of work, and they profile that person and call them. Of course, there's a lot of activity going on with local events, local trade shows, and my personal view is that the better brokers that will create the better deals are people that build skills broader than what they might have had years ago, meaning they have to get into the market, they have to connect with people, they have to throw a big net out, and that's candidly, in my franchise, I pay a significant amount every month to buy the leads that they generate, and I haven't made a phone call in 9 years, which might be stunning. Yet I've had a successful business. So that's what my comment is, that I think that if you're going to be in a business matching people with franchises, you have got to get the leads some way. And if they're not coming through the more traditional methods of lead generation, you've got to get out there and create them yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting. A comment about not being able to reach leads, is that a common, who has that issue? Or having trouble reaching leads? Is that a comment? We hear that from a lot of people. One of the things I think that when you see companies that don't have that problem, they do a good job of figuring out who their target buyer is and aligning the brand story so that it hits a really clear value proposition, and provide enough transparency and information up front where somebody can fully learn about that opportunity. We're in the era of self-directed research. Google's kind of famous stat is 70% of the decision to buy anything today, whether it's a franchise or an insurance quote or a car, 70% of that decision is made before opt-in, meaning like somebody does a significant amount of research. We track IP addresses on the websites we build, and we look at buyers and go back and look and see, well, how many times did they go to the website and what did they read, how long did they read each page, and we use that to design our websites. Franchise buyers as a group spend an ungodly amount of time, up to 52, 54, sometimes even an hour of time before they fill the form out reading about a brand. And what that says is the appetite for information. Like if I'm going to wrap my head around your business, like there's a lot of questions I want to know. How much does it cost? Where do customers come from? How legit is this business we're in? Is it what makes it special and unique? Who's driving the bus? There's lots of questions that any entrepreneur wants to know about any business. If you can't satisfy that 45-minute, hour-long appetite of research on your website when you get them there, they just don't fill the form out. The people that we have a hard time reaching are not calling us back because they're really not interested. And the real sad thing about that is we probably miss the people. We're clearly missing most of them who are the best fit. Like I might be an excellent consultant and be a perfect fit skills-wise for ERA, but I couldn't kind of get the business in, and it didn't catch my attention. It didn't make a sincere emotional connection, and I might have missed my opportunity to have an amazing business life just because. So the way to think about your website and the presence that you put forth to somebody when they're doing research is that takes the place of the first hour conversation with your recruiter. In fact, your recruiter's been fired from that conversation. They don't actually get to have that anymore, except in rare cases. That happens online, and people make up their story about your opportunity based on what they can research. So one of the real kind of changes now is companies have to spend a lot more time and resources and thought in thinking about what is our brand story, how can we unpack our opportunity in a very logical way where it makes sense. And that's not an easy thing to do, to get it right. But boy, when you get it right, people come out of the woodwork because every company has a population of people who are wired for that business. You know, if I'm in health and beauty products, there are people that just get that business at a really deep level. If I've been an IT consultant or done shipping or been a consultant, I might get, or work for a telecom, I would get ERA. If I want to be a business consultant, I might want to be a broker. Like there are people for every brand that will get your brand and get sucked up into the story. And I ran a home staging franchise. That's what we did. We had 100 locations. We used to try to keep buyers in the house for 45 minutes. You bring all the pretty furniture in and decorate it, and there's a whole psychology science that goes around. We found if you could keep a buyer for 45 minutes, the percentage of buyers went way up. Like, a funny thing happens at 45 minutes. You begin to see yourself living in the house, and the value of the life you see becomes worth more than the house. And we would say they're so excited they licked the paint off the wall. They were licking paint. That's what we would say. But a franchise purchase is a very emotional purchase for somebody. It's a lot like buying a house, and only it costs a lot more sometimes, and has a longer time commitment. It's scarier because it's got this huge FTD that's really intimidating for a lot of people. But I think the big thing is that you have to be so transparent, and you really have to put some thought into what questions is this person going to ask, what information do they need to know, and how can I captivate them for 45 minutes? Like the average time on a typical website in franchising is a minute and a half. How do you jump from a minute and a half to an hour? Like that's not easy for the average marketing person to do. So I think that's my big takeaway for what's changed.
Yeah, I think both of what you guys said is true, and I'm still fairly early on in my process of generating leads. I get most of them from the broker network, but I think, if you think about, you want your lead, and then the next step is you want to convert it. And the way I think, to Jeff's point, some things have never changed, and I think building a relationship with a customer or a prospect is the fastest way to convert that lead. The question is how do you get to the point where you can actually meet the person and build a relationship? And I think, and we grapple with this a lot just from a straight marketing standpoint in the companies that I've worked with, is how rapidly that process of engaging a customer has changed. Decades ago, you might have written them a letter, and then as time passed, you might have made a phone call. And as time passed, that fell out of vogue, and then you started sending emails. And now, in this day and age, even email doesn't work. Now you need to be able to master how to engage with somebody over social media, or be able to connect with them over Twitter. And I think understanding how, especially millennial and earlier, how they want to engage, which for a lot of us, so I'm a late boomer, is maddeningly different than how I want to engage with a person. But you have to be able to make that adjustment, because to Jeff's point, you can call someone and they just may not want to engage that way at all. But if you tweet them, or if you get them to follow you on Twitter, you've all of a sudden opened up an opportunity to have a relationship with someone. I will say that I am not super effective at that. It's not the world that I come from. But as I start to have a need to build more leads, to build the brand that I'm trying to build in the Puget Sound area, I'm going to have to master that. So that's a hill that's out there for me to climb.
Thanks. So we heard a little bit of talk about millennials, and Thomas talked about it earlier. How is the rise of the millennials as a buyer changing your approach? Is there anything specific to them? And we've sort of talked generally about how lead generation is changing, but anything specific to millennials?
Sure. Well, we picked on millennials, and that's what we'll talk about, but I think the character of all of clients have changed across the board, where in many cases, earlier in my tenure as a coach, it was that the person with a suit, the 55 to 65-year-old person that got laid off, and candidly, I still see that as a very strong market for franchises. Oh, yeah. Very, very strong. But millennials have sort of come, a couple of groups have come up, and let me mention them because they're worthwhile for you to have on your radar screen. Husbands and wives doing businesses together is definitely a group that's come up. Even the idea of people getting out of college and understanding that a traditional career is as risky as an entrepreneurial career, and there's been studies and research done, and so it brings up another big group. I mean, one of the challenges of millennials is that they're at a stage of their life where they are very busy. They have not necessarily created a significant amount of capital to invest, and even though the mental desire is there, and they're probably more risk-taking and probably willing to get to the bottom line quicker in working with you, there's the financial challenge. But what I have seen, though, is the parent who has said, you know, I invested a lot of money in this kid's liberal arts education, and now they're 30 years old, and they have a kid, and they want to buy a house, and it's just not happening. So I see a significant amount of parents coming to me and saying, I want to do a business with my child. And I've invested money in one of my own son's businesses and learned lessons the hard way. So I love talking to those parents. And we have some very healthy discussions, and some move forward and some don't. But clearly, as you said, our base of potential customers is growing, but the way we coach them and understanding their needs is significantly changing as well, and it's a challenge.
Yeah, I think I employ a lot of millennials on my staff, and they're very astute at pointing out the gaps. And the one kind of trend that I would say, if you asked an articulate millennial, like what's broken, they would say we demand authenticity. Like as a group, they just have a sincere demand for authentic, the real deal. Like they don't want to see stock images on your website. They want to see actual franchise owners. They want to understand the inner workings of a brand and an opportunity and think through it at a much deeper level, because in their mind, they don't trust anything, and they like to assess the risk themselves. And so it probably are, you might be missing, if you don't have those people in your pipeline, you might not be communicating effectively with them, because their demands, when they need more information, they need more detail. Emotional connections, like real sincere emotional connections, are really critical with millennials. We find we do a ton of video production today, what we would call documentary style video, where we spend a day or two with a franchisee and do a 5-minute movie. Like it's just the person doing their thing, and they're really strong, because that's what they're looking for, is they want that real, like, unpolished, unmarketing kind of, like, they're raised on the indie film market, and they're raised on South by Southwest and the SiliconValley.com. I mean, their role models are totally different than other generations, and so they just have this, and they have a real hunger for that information. And so brands that do a very good job of kind of getting towards that, and if you're curious about who some of those brands are, get my card, and I'll send you a list of folks. Phyllis?
So Thomas, do you find, and some of the research I've done, don't the millennials have a desire to want to make a difference?
Yeah, making money is important. The why you make money is more important. And so, we call them Pinterest brands. They like authentic brands that are unique and special. Like, so there's a tendency in that group to shy away from, the big mass-produced, watered-down brands. And so that's why you see a lot of brands like Domino's Pizza has artisan pizza now. That's all an effort to communicate something unique and special to that group. But I think it's it's a real challenge to get to those people. And the upside of that is I would challenge Jeff's, it's a legitimate point to have, but I think what I do see is I see people late 20s, early 30s as a group, millennials, are much better money managers than the generations before them. They are frugal. They have this innate aptitude for, it's called micro-gigging, where you have multiple streams of revenue and many things. So buying a franchise is, they don't even think twice about it. Like their decision to buy is a really easy one because they're 25 or 30 and they're not afraid. I mean, they're raised on this kind of lore of people who fail fabulously in business life, and that's how you learn and become a better entrepreneur. But I see in a lot of the people we place with clients a really interesting trend of very well-capitalized millennials buying very high investment food brands. I see that a lot. It's about a 50-50 split from traditional kind of Caucasian white buyers and a lot of ethnic and kind of racial buyers. I mean, I just see some just unbelievable business owners who are 29 years old and they're buying their 6th unit. You know, it's like $1 million units. They're out there. You just have to appeal to them, and they're looking for the same things: authenticity, business detail. I want to understand how it works. I want answers to all my questions, and then I will talk to you. They have a buying process, and you have a sales process, and those two are not always aligned. And the closer you can get to somebody's innate buying process, the better you can convert through. And I think as we go through the next few years, you're going to see that group's going to get wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And every year it's going to be a little better. And it's a really great time to be in franchising. It's better than any time I've probably in the history of franchising. Like we're set for some amazing things. If millennials aren't worried about health insurance, they're not going to take a job just so they have health insurance. They're not afraid of risk. They don't feel like they're losing anything, and they think business ownership is where the action's at. And so it's just how do you connect with them in an authentic and sincere way. It's a challenge, it forces us to think differently because the way we would want to market might be totally different than what really works with them. But so pay attention to brands that do a good job of it, and there are some, and I can share some case studies with you if you email me afterwards and kind of give you some ideas on who does things really well so you can kind of copy what they're doing, which is what we love to do in franchising. Yeah.
As a result of this analysis that's being done, do you see the sales cycle time expanding now? I mean, if in the past the typical time was 2.5 months,
I see it shortening.
I see it longer or shorter?
Shorter. If you engage people, like the licking paint example, if you can get somebody to lick paint off the wall, and if you're a broker, that's really challenging for the broker business model. Like for those of you that are consultants, like the idea that you can take a generic person high in the funnel and work them down to a buy, you actually have to think differently about where you get your leads and who you're going after and how to engage them. That's for the broker industry, it's not set up for that today. So that like people who get the disconnect there and can make the leap, and that for the most part means you have to market for the brand. If you're doing Minchie's yogurt, you have to generate leads for Minchie's and you have to work them all the way through the process with Minchie's and not show them other things. Like that's what produces sales at a much higher rate. When people are engaged and they're excited about a business, they make, because they've already done 70% of the work up front. So they're coming in at a way higher education level than they used to. And so that shortens it if you have a buying process and a sales process that are online. So if you let people drift, or like you might call somebody and they don't answer and you leave a voicemail, well, that doesn't work today. Like our guys, they make 3 phone calls the first day, they text, they email, they send a drip campaign. I mean, the amount of times you have to reach somebody is much higher and much more compressed than it used to be because everybody screens their calls. Like they don't listen to their voicemails, and they don't open their emails till a week later. So if you really want to get in front, you have to call somebody 2 or 3 times, and it's the second or third call they go, oh, maybe that person wants to talk to me. They don't even put it in their mind that they requested information. That thought just kind of leaves out. So there's some just changes in the way people use technology but I do find that it's more condensed, about a 60-day process, maybe 90. But if you get into 120 days, what we usually see is there's inefficiencies in the sales process people are drifting when they really want to buy. That's my opinion on that.
I mean, I think empirically, I haven't seen many millennials that in my group that I have attempted to recruit. It could be a variety of reasons why. I think any kind of retail concept is capital intensive, so you have to have the money. And you guys probably saw the article in the Times this weekend about how shocked millennials are about buying a house because they don't realize it's so expensive. Same thing with investing in a business. So the few millennials that I have spoken with, they go very quickly through the process. And I don't think I've had a second conversation with any of them. Whereas maybe a boomer or a late boomer, there could be more of an engagement there. So I guess maybe it's a double-edged sword. They're going to be harder to sell, but you're also going to have to spend less time with them because they're going to single themselves out. They'll ace themselves out of an opportunity much faster. And I do agree with you, Thomas. They're more analytical. They've done maybe a little bit more homework up front. They're also, they have excuse my language, but they have a bullshit meter that is very, very refined. And they will not stand for anything that they don't perceive as authentic, or and they'll just opt out quickly.
I mean, there's a problem in our industry, though, because I think there's a tendency for those millennials, because they grew up with computers, to do a lot of research. And I don't think that the material yet is at the professional level that gives them the quality of the information that they look for. And therefore, you get a lot of people that get frustrated, they get misinformed. And I think that we can be more successful either from the franchisor's perspective, from the broker's perspective, when you can get that touch. I would rather work with less people and have quality conversations than a broad base of people and superficial conversations.
Yeah, I think that's the root issue, is the level of marketing material that you need to have to be successful with that group today is, I mean, I could, out of 3,500 brands, maybe 100 have kind of nailed it, and the rest are way behind the times. I mean, just way behind the times. Like, it's not rocket science. It's possible to bridge that gap and have a huge performance breakthrough, but you just have to think differently. Our traditional marketing departments in a franchise system are just not, they don't even understand that issue. So your internal marketing VP typically, a franchise purchase is a very sophisticated, high-ticket item. You have to kind of know that buyer to be able to execute well on that. So I think that's the root issue. When I have brands that we work with that do well with those, they'll have a website with 60 pages and all types of lead nurturing going on all around, and lots of flexibility. That's a great question, though. I mean, how do you, if you can market well to a millennial, the byproduct is everybody else benefits from that. It's not just millennials. You actually improve your results all across the board, because that's actually the way we're conditioned. If I want to go to a restaurant, and I was doing this last night, walking around the market, like I go to Yelp and I read reviews and I try to kind of figure out where I'm going to go, and that's the buying process today. Our franchise is just way more. I would have been happy to coach them to run a restaurant. It was a pretty fun set. 5-star leading review just to stay. There you go.
Let's move on to the next question. This might be a rhetorical question, but can a brand story make or break a franchise development effort? It sounds like from what we've talked about so far, that's probably yes, especially with millennials. But maybe you could go into a little more detail, like what are the elements of a successful brand story?
I guess I go first. I mean, at the end of the day, it really is the brand story. So assuming you pulled a person in who's interested in listening to the brand story, and they are financially qualified and they're reasonably motivated, it really is all about the story. And I guess the comment that I would make is that the elements that have to go into the story is that the business has to make sense, and the person selling the business, which is not the broker, I'm very clear with people that if you expect me to be selling you a franchise, you're talking to the wrong person. I will be introducing you to someone in the franchise, and it's their job to sell you. It's my job to help you sort of sort through it. But things like, what is the culture of the franchise? If it has just if it's a beginning franchise, how do you sort of talk around that issue to give somebody the confidence that the system itself is going to be a successful system, even though there is not a lot of validation? So, I've been involved in the past in buying independent businesses, and the due diligence process sometimes takes a long time, and it's very deep, and it's difficult. And I think with a franchise, the franchisor rep has to really understand that for all the connecting points to meet for that client, They have to understand the client's transferable skills. They have to understand the client's motivations. They have to understand a little bit of their background and things that they're looking to do going forward that they want to do less of going backwards. And so when I look at my business, I'm trying to pull up the needs of that client. I'm introducing them to the franchisor, and my expectations of the franchisor today are fairly low in terms of their true connection with the client. I'm hoping that they can explain the nature of the business and answer their questions in a professional manner. And then the heavy lifting comes to getting the client through the emotional barriers and the ultimate close. And so if there were less, and it seems like there's less broker deals being done, it just puts a bigger burden on the franchisor for their salespeople to work at a higher level of connecting and explaining the culture. Oftentimes I'll tell a client, you don't love or hate the person who's selling the franchise. They may even be a commission person. You need to get beyond that and find out who is really going to be your long-term relationship with that franchise.
Jeff, though, I do find that a lot of prospects don't know what questions to ask. So maybe the brand story is really the key there, is being able to tell your brand story. Because I speak with a lot of prospects who kind of, their level of interrogation is very thin. And beyond that, I think they're waiting for me to tell them the story. And so I do think the brand story, and you laid out the right things, the culture, what's the brand trying to accomplish, what's it like to run a business like this. I think all of those things are important. But I think for a lot of prospects, it's rare that I have one that is got a whole list of questions. We've just come away with one who did. But for everyone like that, they're just kind of waiting for me to make it come alive for them. So I do think the brand stories.
One last point on exactly what you're saying is that I respect franchisors that have a system of educating the client and taking them through the steps, as opposed to a franchisor that says, "What are you looking for?" and doesn't really have a good weekly process of the first week we're going to talk about what your interest is. The second week, we're going to talk about the nature of our business. Then we're going to talk about how you choose locations. We'll talk about the FDD. We'll talk about the marketing strategy. And so there's all laid out, and so the client has an expectation of where they're going. And I find that really helpful in engaging someone.
Yeah, sales process is, that gets into the next question we'll talk about when I pop that back. One thing, how many times have you gone to a restaurant with a friend or a spouse, and you're all dressed up and you're excited because you read a review online, and you get there and you look at the menu and not a single thing pops out, and you just really don't know what to order? Has that happened to anybody? That's a really common scenario. If you're like most people, you would ask the waiter or waitress, hey, what do you recommend? So what's a typical answer you would get from how many?
Oh, it's all good.
It's all good. It's all good. Yeah, that's a useless answer, right? That doesn't help you in your buying decision. And if you said, I really like salmon. We did this last night. I went to dinner at, I think it's called Boston, a little seafood place kind of around the corner. That was really good. And the guy I was with dinner likes salmon. And he goes, "How's the salmon?" And the waiter said, "The salmon's really good. It's organic. It's, I don't really like salmon, but I sell a lot of it. I don't have to take much back to the chef." That was his answer. What does that make you think of? You're wondering why he takes any back to the chef at all. So the thing to remember about recruiting is people are looking for positive reinforcement. They've already 70% of the way decided that they're interested and are curious about it. And what you're looking for the waiter to say is, that the salmon's great. If you like salmon, it's really good salmon. It's organic. We have to get it from the special vendor. It's got great sauce. But the real star on the menu is the margarita pizza. We have this guy that comes in at 3 o'clock in the morning. We import flour from Tuscany, and the chef grows heirloom tomatoes and herbs. And if you like a margarita pizza, it's amazing. That's what you want when you ask the waiter. You want him to tell you a story about something that helps you make your buying decision. Because the story, from what we're talking about, is the essence of communication. We use stories to relate to one another. We use stories to make sense of the world around us, and we use stories to make decisions. And that is at the root of all recruiting, is you have to use stories to explain concepts and to bridge the gaps and relate to people. And that's what a brand story has the power to do. It has the power to just open the doors and help people relate on a very deep emotional level where they're buying the pizza and they're excited and they feel good about the decision they already decided to make before they ended up in the conversation. And that's the area where franchise brands we just stink at it. I mean, we just behind the FDD with gates and lots of things you can't get access to, and we're so out of sync with the buyer today. That's why we're not performing well. And boy, if you can uncork it a little bit, there's just all kind of people. And people buy businesses they relate to. Like, I lost my mom to Lou Gehrig's disease, which is, I don't wish on anybody, but I understand home health care businesses at a very deep personal level. Like, I'm an entrepreneur, I would buy one just because I've been through that ringer. My wife makes macaroons, the French macaroons, the colored ones. She likes to make those. We have this big thing in our house where we make them around Thanksgiving. I would get a cupcake or a cookie business for the same reason, because I have a deep personal connection to that brand. If I had worked in a telecom, I might get a consulting business that dealt with expense reduction. Or if I had been and I worked in a salon, I might get beauty supplies. But the key to lead generation today and why brand story is you help people who are already interested in what you have to sell relate to you, and the light bulb goes off. They go, I could do that. You can attract the interest and keep it for 45 minutes. That's the key. And then what you have is a very different kind of conversation where people are climbing through the phone and they're like, this sales process gets a whole lot shorter. It's just different than what we've historically done as an industry.
We should move on to the next one. So what are some franchise lead generation tactics that work in 2016? Anybody want to take
This is
a
probably
shot?
your sweet spot. I've got my thoughts.
Go ahead.
Well, and again, sometimes I felt that with the quality of the leads that came through my system, I was beating my heads against the wall, so I just stopped using them. So what I have found, and listening to particularly you, I think we're getting clients at different stages of where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I have found is that I'm really not necessarily trying to find somebody interested in a brand or interested in an industry. I'm looking to find somebody who's just interested in changing their life and doing something different. So there's a lot of education and supporting comments and things that I say around those dialogues and around those discussions. And so I'm taking somebody from, I always thought about being my own business, but I really didn't know how, and you can do what and help me in what way. And so I feel that I'm sort of creating the market, at least in my own little market, which is sort of different than what you're trying to do for franchisors, which I think it actually all works together, because I'd love to see better quality leads. But today I'm just not seeing it. So my only lead generation activity is going out and, I wrote a book, and that's opened up a lot of opportunities for me. So I probably do 3 or 4 speaking engagements per month on people who are just generally thinking about being in their own business, and a certain percentage of them sieves through to say, let's have a franchise discussion.
Yeah, I mean, 2 different types of lead generation. So I do brand-specific lead generation, where we help companies connect directly and generally not go through a broker because they're looking for an alternative way to increase sales. You're looking for somebody who's not sure what they're going to buy. But my advice to you or any broker would be, look at the brands in your portfolio, pick some that do a horrible job of marketing or don't have a budget for marketing.
And give them your name?
No. No, you can't. I'll take it. But I think that's the opportunity. There are people looking for those businesses, and you probably have an opportunity to educate those buyers about that particular opportunity. And you might attract people that are interested in that segment, and then if that's not a fit, there are other. But you're missing the best, easiest to close people with the strategy you've been doing. I think that's the challenge for brokers networks.
I don't know. My percentage is 20 to 25% of people I engage.
Not you particularly. I mean, like brokers as a group. I mean, the average broker really struggles with that. Like, I mean, you're at the high end in performance in your industry. Yeah. and what you do works.
At the end.
Yeah, but I mean, if you want to recruit franchisees, if that's your goal, and I want to recruit people to buy this franchise, start with the people that are the closest to it, the customers, the people that get the space. Start with the people who are the easiest to convert, and then move up the funnel, rather than always starting at the top of the funnel and doing the heavy lifting. I mean, that's a valuable thing that you do. That's why people pay the commissions. There's this enormous group of people in between where I am and you are, in the middle of the funnel, that nobody goes after, that are just fumbling around until they latch on to something. And that's that huge group of people we're missing out on. And they're out there. Yeah, so that's, I think, a real important thing to think through.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have much more expertise than I do on this. But I do kind of feel that I'm probably my best asset again, I'm thinking about converting leads, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where my mind is at right now. And I think I'm my own best asset to do that, because nobody's going to make my concept come alive or care about making my concept come alive more than I do. And so I often think about, well, how do I get my story out? Because it's incredibly inefficient to do it one-on-one and try to find, I have people who talk to me at my stores who say, hey, what's it like running this business? And I might, on a weekly basis have a conversation like that with one person. So that's not very efficient. But how do I have that? It's typically a good quality conversation, and it feels good that I made a connection. So how can I put that on steroids? And I believe one area that I haven't done a good job is, and this is going to sound a little cliche for any of you who kind of follow the fortunes of marketing, but I don't think I've made good use of social media to its fullest extent. And there are new ways to do that emerging all the time. So how do I make my personality and my passion for CPR cell phone repair come through in a way that's meaningful as that conversation I have across my cash wrap with a customer who's kind of said, hey, you look like you're having fun. Is this a fun business? And, I'm kind of been thinking about doing something like this. So I think Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Google, any of the opportunities that I have to engage with and where I can express my enthusiasm. Jeff, you wrote a book. And that book generates a lot of interest for you. I don't know that writing a book is really germane for me, but I could write a blog probably.
Yeah.
And I could do that, and I could probably do that with a certain amount of passion. Time is always the issue, but I do think that there's an untapped opportunity for me that I could leverage there.
The recipe that works today, just to lay it out so that you can repeat this with any brand, is to build some type of home base online that explains your brand story in enough detail to capture somebody's attention. That's typically a recruitment website that's separate from your consumer website. So that's the best practice in franchising. Split your websites up. Don't put your franchise information on a page on your consumer site. That just doesn't work very well. So that's why everybody has separate websites for that. And go through a lot of trouble to unpack your story and answer all those questions about culture and fit. Once you have that, then it's the next level is how can I intersect people where they are? Because that's what you're trying to get at, is you don't want to just wait for the one poor guy that walks in the store. You're like, there's more of that guy out there somewhere. How can you intersect? So that means paid search. That means Facebook advertising. It means LinkedIn advertising. It means email marketing, big data campaigns. All types of portal advertising is still valid today with different groups. Retargeting people with ads, content marketing, which would be blogs, wire releases. Using wire releases is a form of article to insert, but generally just broadcasting your story over and over and over again. Like it's your audience is going to just tune into your story for a 30, 60, 90-day window, and then they're gone. So you really have to kind of beat your drum more aggressively than you think you do, because they didn't read what you wrote 6 months ago. So you constantly have to push articles out. People are looking for signs of momentum, and they're looking for that story. So
there is a strategy, just one last bit. There's a strategy that I haven't used personally, and I wished I had thought of it, but someone in this local market did it. And I always thought that the LinkedIn groups were sort of very socialistic. Anybody can be a member, anybody can post things. But I've learned that certain LinkedIn groups, some very large LinkedIn groups, are managed or owned by one person. And I've found that you can actually buy the promotional power of that person. And I've seen a franchise broker spend a couple of $1,000s with a very large LinkedIn group who then promoted the heck out of an activity they were doing. And I was quite surprised at that. It's just like, really? You gave the guy $2,000 and it sounded like you were business partners. So that's another avenue, I think, for marketing that's a little creative, that's sort of come out of the sort of social media changes that are going on. You can actually buy that kind of support.
So we've run up against our 1:30 end time, but I maybe spend 20 seconds if you can, some parting thoughts and any conventional wisdom that you think is probably wrong today.
I think just conventional wisdom would be you have to call people more frequently than you think you do, and you're not bugging them. You know, like if you get cable installed in your house or apartment and they schedule an appointment with you, they're going to call you 2 or 3 times till you answer the phone. And as a recruiter, you have to do the same thing because people aren't geared to answer. They just screen calls. So like really be much more responsive. Don't be afraid to text people. We text everybody. And doesn't, you'd be surprised it crosses all age groups, people who text. It's much more efficient. You can dramatically improve your contact rate. And just don't be afraid to put your story out there. Like put more of it than you think you need and be more aggressive on it.
My last comment is no matter where you are in the chain of commerce, don't ever try to sell someone a business. If you find that you're selling them, I think it tends to push them away. And that doesn't mean that you can't recognize when they are moving towards you and help them, but if you're really actively selling it, like you might be selling a car or something else, you're going to make your life more difficult, whether you're a broker or a franchisor or a rep or a marketer, social media marketer.
Your wisdom is my conventional wisdom because I haven't been in the business long enough. So I'm learning from you guys.
Yeah, I do on our website, on the blog section of our website, we have a lot of articles on franchise lead generation trends and takeaways from the IFA conference. It's really good reading material. You can learn a lot from just looking at the articles we write about franchising. They're very helpful. And thanks for having us.
Great.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, that ends. We thank our panel. Thanks, everyone, for coming out for the FBN, and we're adjourned. We'll hang around for questions if anybody has any.